I was 25 years old, living in a hostel that had become more of a cage than a home. From the outside, the building looked proud, 4 stories of brick and paint that had long since faded into dullness. But inside, it was a patchwork of mismatched furniture, peeling plaster, and a constant hum of youthful energy that never really quieted down. I had spent enough nights lying awake to know that sleep was rare in a place filled with restless students. Every day carried the same rhythm. Morning began with rushed footsteps in the hallway, doors slamming as people ran to their classes, and the thin, bitter smell of instant coffee lingering in the air. I would roll out of bed, often later than I planned, pulling on wrinkled clothes and reminding myself that I really should iron them, though I never did. Classes blurred together. Sometimes I paid attention. Sometimes my mind wandered far away, building castles in the sky, imagining a life more exciting than the one I lived. Evenings were the loudest time in the hostel. My roommates would gather in the common lounge to argue about cricket scores, politics, or would eat someone else's leftover biryani from the shared fridge. Laughter spilled from the hallways, mixed with the blaring of someone's cheap speaker that always seemed to play the same 3 songs on repeat. I joined them sometimes, but more often than not, I stayed back in my room, staring at the ceiling and wondering what exactly I was doing with my life. There was a strange comfort in the chaos, but also a heaviness that came with it. Everyone else seemed to be running forward, talking about their future jobs, their families, their plans. I, on the other hand, felt stuck in place. I went through the motions, completed assignments, smiled when expected, but inside there was a quiet ache, an emptiness I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was loneliness, maybe it was a fear of being ordinary, or maybe it was both. The hostel itself seemed to share in my weariness. The walls were thin, so thin I could hear my neighbors snoring or crying softly at night. The staircase groaned under the weight of footsteps, as if it had been carrying the burden of students for decades. And then there were the fire alarms, ancient metal boxes screwed onto walls, their lights dead, their sirens silent. Once, during a practice drill, the warden tried to set one off, only for it to sputter out with a weak crackle. We laughed about it then, joked about how useless the system was. But I think in the back of my mind, I wondered what would happen if there really was a fire. Still, nothing ever happened in places like this, did it? We believe ourselves untouchable, tucked away in a bubble of assignments, deadlines, and small dramas. The biggest scare we had was when the power cut out during a football match or when the Wi-Fi failed before an exam. Life was predictable, repetitive, safe in its own noisy way. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just around the corner. Nights were the worst. Lying in the dark, listening to the ceiling fans' rattling blades, I felt like the world was holding its breath. There was a sense that the air itself was tense, that the hostel's old bones were whispering secrets we hadn't yet heard. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was being dramatic, but deep down, I knew that the monotony couldn't last forever. Something was coming, something big enough to break the rhythm of my days, something that would pull me out of my ordinary life and force me to see the world and myself in an entirely new light. I had no idea then that it would arrive in the form of fire. It was close to midnight when the ordinary rhythm of hostel life was shattered. I had been lying on my bed, half distracted by a book I wasn't really reading, when I heard it. A sudden burst of shouting, followed by hurried footsteps pounding against the floorboards. At first, I thought it was another late-night argument or some prank gone too far. Noise was nothing unusual here, but the tone in those voices, sharp and desperate, made me sit up straight. The hallway outside my door thudded with the sound of people running, and then I caught the unmistakable crackle, not of laughter, not of static, but of flames. I rushed to the window, my heart hammering in my chest. A glow flickered against the courtyard walls, too bright, too violent to be anything but fire. A sickening wave of heat carried on the air, even up to the 3rd floor, seeping through the glass. Down below, smoke curled upward in greedy tendrils, black and thick, swallowing the night sky. Students were spilling out into the courtyard, coughing, shouting, waving their arms at those still inside. I stumbled back, choking on the sudden dread that filled my lungs. Fire. It was real, not a drill, not a prank. The hostel, the place I called home for years, was burning. I flung my door open, and the corridor was already alive with chaos. My neighbor sprinted past me, eyes wide, belongings clutched hastily in their arms. Someone screamed from down the hall, "Run! Get out!" I joined the rush, but halfway down the corridor, the truth hit me like a blow. The stairs. They were my only way down, and they were already shrouded in smoke and flames. The fire had started from the lower levels, climbing upward with merciless hunger. I froze, my stomach twisting. The heat was unbearable, radiating upward, licking against the walls. The air thickened with every passing second. My lungs burned as I tried to breathe. My throat scraped raw. I backed away from the stairwell, stumbling into the corridor again. There was no other exit. Third floor. Trapped. Panic clawed at me, faster than the fire itself. I slammed my fist against the wall, looking wildly for an escape. The windows opened to a deadly drop. Too far to survive. The fire alarms, those useless old boxes, remained silent, mocking me with their dead lights. The world was noise, heat, and smoke pressing in from all sides. I tried to stay calm. I told myself I could figure something out, that there had to be a way, but every second made it clearer. There wasn't. My head spun. The smoke thickened, curling into the corridor like a living thing, wrapping itself around my body, squeezing the breath from my chest. My vision blurred, tears streaming from my eyes as they stung from the fumes. Every breath was fire in my lungs, every exhale a gasp of desperation. The noise outside blurred into a distant hum. Screams, shouts, the wail of sirens far away. It all melted into a dull roar in my ears. My knees buckled beneath me. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to keep upright, but the strength drained out of me like sand slipping through fingers. Memories flashed in fragments. My parents' faces, the laughter of friends, all the ordinary moment of life I had once complained about. Now, in the face of death, I wanted nothing more than to return to them. I coughed, a deep, hacking sound that rattled my chest. Spots danced before my eyes. I clawed at the air, desperate for oxygen, for escape, for anything. The flames were no longer just downstairs. They were everywhere, creeping closer, crawling up the walls, their light flickering like cruel, taunting eyes. And then, somewhere deep inside me, something gave up. The fight drained away, replaced by a hollow surrender. My body was heavy, too heavy to keep upright. I slid down the wall to the floor, the cold tiles against my skin, the only thing still real. This is it, I thought dimly, my mind echoing the words like a final prayer. I'm not going to make it. The world darkened around the edges, sounds fading, vision shrinking. My last breath was smoke and fire. My last thought was a strange, aching wish that someone would remember me, that my life would mean something beyond this ending. And then everything went black. Out of the darkness, I first heard it, a voice, strong, steady, commanding. It cut through the chaos like a blade through fog. At first I thought it was in my head, some part of me refusing to let go, but then I felt it closer, louder, urgent. Stay with me, don't let go. Hands gripped me, firm and unyielding. I was barely aware of my own body, but I felt myself being lifted, pulled from the cold tiles into something solid. Strong arms wrapped around me, holding me with a certainty that no flames could shake. My head lolled against a broad shoulder, the heat and smoke still clawing at me, but that voice, that strength, anchored me in the storm. The world was fire, and then suddenly it wasn't. I felt movement, the heavy stride of boots on burning ground. My body was weightless in his arms, as though he carried me with ease despite the smoke that burned around us. I wanted to speak, to open my eyes, but every attempt only dragged me back into haze. Still, that voice came again, closer to my ear this time, softer but filled with urgency. You're safe. I've got you. Safe. The word struck something deep within me, even as I drifted in and out of consciousness. It was a promise, a lifeline. And then it happened. The air changed. One moment I was suffocating, drowning in smoke and heat, and the next I was thrust into a rush of night air, cool and sharp against my lungs. It stung as I tried to breathe, But it was life. Sweet, painful, beautiful life. My chest heaved, dragging in lungfuls of oxygen that felt like a miracle. Shouts surrounded us now. Students, neighbors, alarms, and sirens. The world was chaos, but in his arms I felt removed from it all. I clung to the sensation of safety, even as my body remained limp, exhausted, and weak. I blinked, the blur clearing slowly. My eyes opened just enough to catch glimpses. The orange glow of flames behind us, the flashing red lights of fire trucks, the worried faces in the crowd. But most of all I saw him, the firefighter. He set me down gently on the pavement, as though I were fragile glass. For a moment, his gloved hand lingered on my shoulder, grounding me, reassuring me. My vision steadied, and I finally looked into his face. He couldn't have been more than 35. His features were strong, cut in the kind of lines that spoke of both strength and weariness. His helmet framed his face, smudged with soot, but his eyes were clear. Dark, steady, unwavering. They met mine with an intensity that left me breathless all over again. "You're okay," he said firmly, almost like he needed me to believe it as much as he did. Gratitude welled up in my chest, so suddenly it hurt. I wanted to thank him, to pour every ounce of my soul into words, but all I could manage was a broken whisper. "You saved me." His expression softened, though the strength never left his gaze. "It's my job," he replied, almost dismissively, as if carrying me out of hell was nothing extraordinary. But to me it was everything. I coughed again, my throat raw, and he shifted closer, supporting me with one arm as a medic knelt beside us, even while others swarmed around, checking vitals, wrapping a blanket around me. He didn't leave. His presence was constant, steady, a pillar I leaned on when everything else blurred. The chaos around us barely registered anymore. The fire still roared, sirens still wailed, but in that moment, my world had narrowed to him, to the man who had walked through fire for me. I stared at him longer than I should have, my heart pounding in a rhythm I didn't recognize. This was more than gratitude. It was deeper, stranger, a bond forged in smoke and flames, carved into my chest with every breath I had fought to take. Why did I feel this way? Why did his touch, his words, stir something inside me that no one else ever had? I couldn't understand it, but I couldn't ignore it either. When the medic asked if I could walk, I tried to stand, but my legs trembled. Instantly, his arm was around me again, steadying me. I leaned into him, embarrassed by my weakness, but comforted by his strength. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly safe in someone's presence. Safe, seen, and connected. It didn't make sense. He was a stranger, and yet, in those few minutes, he had become more important to me than anyone else ever had. As they led me toward the ambulance, I turned my head, still clinging to his hand like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. He squeezed it once, firm and reassuring, and though he let go a moment later, the warmth of his touch stayed with me. That night, as the flames died down behind us, something new sparked quietly within me. I didn't just owe him my life. Somehow, I had given him my heart too, the hours after the fire passed in a haze. I remember being loaded into the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke, though not nearly as thick as my clothes. The paramedics fussed over me, checking my breathing, shining lights in my eyes, wrapping a mask over my face to pump in cool oxygen. My body was trembling, part shock, part exhaustion. I must have drifted in and out, because the next time I was fully aware, I was lying in a small hospital room, the white walls too clean, too bright. My throat still burned, and my lungs felt heavy, but at least I was alive. A drip needle sat taped against my arm, and my chest rose and fell with the mechanical hiss of the oxygen tube. For a while, it was just silence. Nurses came and went. My thoughts swirled, images of fire, heat, and panic replaying fragments. And then, suddenly he was there, the firefighter. He stood in the doorway for a moment, helmet tucked under one arm, his uniform still smudged with soot as though he hadn't yet taken the time to clean himself. His presence filled the room, not with noise but with a calm, steady strength that made my heart lurch. "You're awake," he said, stepping closer. His voice was gentler this time, stripped of the commanding tone he'd used in the fire. I swallowed, my throat rough. Yeah. I think so. My voice cracked, but he smiled, and somehow that eased the embarrassment. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, resting his helmet against his knee. How are you feeling? Like I swallowed half the smoke in that building. I joked weakly. My chest still ached, but I couldn't help it. The words tumbled out, anything to fill the silence. To my relief, he chuckled, a low, warm sound. That's because you almost did. You're lucky we got to you in time. There was something in the way he said we, as though he refused to take full credit. But I knew better. He had carried me. He had risked everything to pull me from the flames. Thank you, I said more seriously this time. My eyes burned, but not from the smoke. I mean it. You saved my life. He waved a hand, almost brushing it off. It's what I'm trained to do. But you didn't have to, I don't know, care as much as you did. I pressed, searching his face. You stayed with me. You didn't let go. His expression softened, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying me as though weighing his words. Sometimes, he said slowly, it's not just about pulling someone out. It's about making sure they know they're safe once they're out. That's the part most people don't see. The words lodged in my chest, deeper than I expected. There was a kindness in him that went beyond duty, beyond heroics. We spoke for a while after that. Simple things at first, my name, my studies, how long I'd lived in the hostel. He told me his name too, and though it felt too sacred to repeat out loud just then, I tucked it carefully into my memory. He had been a firefighter for over a decade. He spoke about it with humility, not pride, as though saving lives was simply a responsibility, not something to be admired for. When he finally stood to leave, I felt a pang I couldn't explain. I didn't want him to go, but he promised to check in again, and for some reason, I believed him. And he did. Over the next few weeks, as I recovered, I found myself drawn to the fire station. At first, I told myself it was just gratitude. I wanted to thank him properly, beyond the rushed words of a hospital room. I would show up with small things, boxes of sweets, packets of snacks, handwritten notes tucked into folded envelopes. The other firefighters teased him good-naturedly whenever I came, calling me a shadow, but he never seemed annoyed. If anything, he welcomed me. We'd sit together in the quiet corners of the station, sipping tea from chipped mugs while the world outside carried on. Our conversations deepened with each visit. He told me stories of the fires he fought, the lives saved, the ones lost. He didn't romanticize it. He spoke plainly, honestly, about the sacrifices it demanded, the nights of exhaustion, the weight of responsibility. I listened, absorbing every word, and in turn, I found myself opening up too, about my studies, my uncertainties, the loneliness I carried but rarely admitted. He never judged. He just listened, really listened, in a way few people ever had. There was a gentleness in the way he treated me, a warmth that I began to notice wasn't given to everyone. He laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. He asked about my health, my sleep, my meals. He noticed when I was tired, when I seemed quieter than usual. It wasn't grand gestures. It was the small things. The way he refilled my cup without asking, the way he slowed his steps so I could keep up, the way he remembered every little detail I told him. And slowly, I realized something that both terrified and comforted me. He cared, not just in the way he cared for everyone as a firefighter, but in a way that was particular, directed, toward me. Every time I left the station, I carried a strange ache in my chest. Gratitude, yes, but something else too, something deeper, something I couldn't yet name. All I knew was that the man who had carried me out of the flames was now carrying me to the quieter fires of my own heart. The visits to the fire station became less about gratitude and more about something else, though I couldn't put into words at the time. At first, I would come by during the day, slipping in with tea or food for the crew, always telling myself it was just to repay a kindness. But as the weeks turned into months, I began staying longer. The station itself became familiar. The smell of smoke lingering in the garage, the hum of the radios, the heavy silence whenever the alarm bell rang. And him. Always him. There were nights when his shift stretched late, and I found myself sitting with him in the common room after the rest of the team had gone quiet. Sometimes the TV would be on, showing old reruns of cricket matches or the news, but we rarely paid attention. We'd talk instead, our voices low, filling the space with words that seemed to matter more in the dark. One night, he ordered food for the both of us, insisting I shouldn't keep bringing gifts when he hadn't given me anything in return. We sat cross-legged on the floor, eating straight from the containers, laughing about how badly the restaurant had overcooked the naan. It wasn't much, just a simple meal, but it felt warmer than any banquet. Other evenings he'd invite me to his apartment nearby, especially after particularly long shifts when he didn't want to leave me waiting alone at the station. His place was modest, just a small one-bedroom with plain furniture, but it carried a sense of calm that I hadn't felt anywhere else. He always made tea for me, strong and sweet, and we'd sit on his worn-out couch watching whatever program happened to be on. Sometimes the silence stretched between us, but it never felt uncomfortable. What struck me most was how safe I felt around him. I had never known that kind of safety, not in my hostel, not in my restless student life, not even in my own skin at times. With him, I didn't need to pretend to be busy or clever or strong. I could just be, and that was enough. He had a way of listening that made me open up without realizing it. I found myself sharing worries I'd kept buried for years, about failing to measure up, about not knowing what I wanted from life, about the crushing fear that maybe I was destined to remain ordinary. He never laughed at me. He never dismissed my concerns. Instead, he looked at me with those steady eyes and reminded me that being ordinary wasn't a curse. That purpose often came quietly, not with fanfare. "Don't be in a hurry to define yourself," he told me once, his voice calm, his gaze fixed on a mug in his hands. "Life has a way of showing you who you are when you least expect it. Just don't stop listening for it." Those words stayed with me long after I left that night, echoing in my chest like a secret melody. Sometimes he would turn the conversation to me, asking about my classes, my friends, my dreams. And when I stumbled over answers, uncertain and clumsy, he never seemed disappointed. Instead, he encouraged me, told me I had more potential than I realized, that surviving what I'd been through was already proof of strength. His faith in me felt undeserved, but it also lit a spark I hadn't felt in years. In return, I tried to learn about him. He never boasted about his work, but slowly, he let me glimpse pieces of his life. The sacrifices he'd made, the long nights when fear gripped him as much as the flames did, the times he'd lost people despite his best efforts. He spoke quietly, almost reluctantly, as though the weight of those memories was something he carried alone. But the fact that he shared them with me at all made me feel trusted, chosen. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sweeping gestures, no grand confessions. Instead, it was the small things. The way he would set an extra cup of tea on the counter before I even asked, the way he'd check if I'd eaten dinner, the way he remembered that I hated bitter coffee but liked extra sugar. Those details, unnoticed by the world, made me feel seen in a way I never had before. Sometimes I caught myself watching him when he wasn't looking, the lines of exhaustion on his face, the quiet way he carried himself, the strength that never demanded recognition. I wonder if he had any idea what he meant to me, how much space he had begun to take up in my thoughts. But I never said it out loud. I told myself it was enough to sit there beside him, sharing silence, sharing laughter, sharing meals. Enough to know that someone like him wanted me around, not out of obligation, but because he chose to. And yet, every time I left his apartment late at night, walking back through quiet streets, I felt the same ache. The warmth of his presence clung to me, and the emptiness of my own room seemed sharper in comparison. Still, I couldn't bring myself to ask for more. Whatever this was, this friendship, this closeness, it was already more than I had ever expected from life. And so I stayed in that space between gratitude and something deeper, never daring to cross the line. Not yet. The night it happened was nothing unusual at first. We had shared a simple dinner at his apartment. Lentils, rice, and a salad. He insisted on chopping himself despite my protests. We watched part of a documentary he liked, then fell into easy conversation until it grew late. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door, as he always did, reminding me to message once I reached my hostel safely. Don't cut through the alleys, he said, his brow furrowed in quiet concern. Stick to the main road. It was such a small thing, ordinary even, but the way he said it, with that gentle firmness, that protective care, settled in my chest like a seed. The streets were quiet, washed in the pale glow of street lamps. My footsteps echoed, and the cool air carried faint traces of smoke from somewhere far away. I thought about his voice, about the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, about the way he always remembered details others forgot. And suddenly, the truth I had been tiptoeing around for weeks hit me with the force of storm. This wasn't gratitude anymore. It wasn't admiration for a hero or comfort in a friend. It was love. The realization startled me so much that I stopped walking. My breath came uneven, as though I'd just run a great distance. Love. The word itself felt dangerous, fragile, immense. I pressed a hand against my chest, as if I could calm the wild rhythm of my heart. But it was useless. The truth was out, and there was no pushing it back into silence. Yet with that truth came fear. What if he didn't feel the same? What if I had misread every kindness, every lingering look, every protective gesture? He was older, wiser, grounded in ways I could only dream of. I was still stumbling through life, uncertain of myself, uncertain of everything. How could someone like him ever see me as more than a young man he had rescued, someone to be looked after but never loved? I walked on, but my thoughts spiraled faster than my steps. Is it wrong to want more from the man who saved my life? The question gnawed at me, whispering accusations in the dark. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was turning something pure into something greedy. He had already given me so much, his time, his trust, his care. To want his heart, as well, wasn't that asking too much? And yet, I couldn't deny what was growing inside me. Love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't insult logic or weigh worthiness. It just arrives uninvited and refuses to leave. Over the next few days, I began noticing the signs more keenly, the ones I had brushed off before. The way he always pulled out the chair for me when we ate together. The way he checked if the tea was sweet enough for my taste. The way his hand would linger just a second longer on my shoulder when he said goodbye. Subtle gestures, nothing dramatic, but each one whispered possibilities I dared not speak aloud. One evening at the station, I had brought snacks for the crew as usual. He was off duty that night, but stayed behind with me after everyone else drifted away. We sat side by side, sharing laughter over some silly joke, when I noticed him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. His eyes lingered, warm and steady, as though he were memorizing me. When I asked what he was thinking, he shook his head with a small smile. "You surprise me sometimes," he said quietly. "In good ways." It was nothing extravagant, nothing anyone else would have thought twice about. But to me it was everything. My cheeks grew warm, and I couldn't hold his gaze for long. That simple compliment wrapped around me like a blanket, soft and undeniable. Later, as I walked home again, I replayed that moment over and over in my mind. The softness in his voice, the way his eyes had lingered. Maybe, just maybe, there was more in his heart than he allowed himself to show. Still, the fear didn't leave me. I was caught between hope and doubt, like standing on the edge of a cliff, wondering whether the air would hold me or let me fall. But one truth had settled too deeply to ignore. I loved him. Whether he ever returned it or not, whether it remained unspoken or someday blossomed into something more, I couldn't escape it. Love had found me in the quiet of his presence, in the warmth of his care, in the steady strength that had carried me from the flames and into a life I hadn't known was waiting. And as terrifying as it was, it also felt inevitable. I was no longer just the boy he had rescued. I was the boy who wanted his heart. It was a quiet evening, the kind that carried no urgency, no weight, except the one pressed against my chest. We had finished dinner at his apartment. A simple meal, nothing fancy, yet it tasted warmer because he had cooked it. Afterward, he poured us both tea, and we sat by the window, the city's faint hum drifting through the open pane. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It rarely was. But tonight, it felt charged like static before a storm. I stirred my tea endlessly, watching the tiny ripple circle outward, my heart pounding louder than the city outside. I knew this couldn't stay inside me any longer. I had rehearsed the words so many times in my room, on late-night walks, even whispering them into the dark when no one could hear. But now that he was here, just a few feet away, his presence steady and grounding, the words lodged in my throat. What if this ruins everything? What if he pulls away? What if I lose the one person who makes me feel whole? He noticed my quietness. "You're restless tonight," he said gently, his eyes searching mine. "Something on your mind?" I swallowed hard. My hands trembled slightly as I set the cup down. This was it. The edge of the cliff I'd been circling for weeks. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely steady. "And I'm terrified of saying it, because I don't want to lose what we have." His gaze softened, and he leaned back, giving me space but also his full attention. "You won't lose me," he said firmly. "Whatever it is, just say it." I drew in a shaky breath, every nerve in my body sparking. That night, the fire, it changed me. Not just because you saved my life, but because you became more than a hero to me. You became someone I can't stop thinking about. Someone I've come to love. The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. My heart raced so wildly I was sure he could hear it. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. I stared at the floor, waiting for silence, for rejection, for something to shatter. But instead, there was a long breath, and then his voice, gentle, steady, carrying weight I'd never heard before. "I was hoping you'd say that." My head shot up. He was smiling softly, though his eyes carried a depth of emotion that left me breathless. "You think it was just duty that made me carry you out of that burning building?" he asked. "It wasn't." That moment left a mark on me, too. I can't explain it, but when I held you in my arms, something inside me changed. And every day since then, being near you has only made it stronger. I blinked, stunned, my chest filling with a warmth so fierce it hurt. "You mean?" He reached across the small space between us and took my hand, his touch firm but tender. "I mean that I feel the same. Maybe I was too careful, too afraid of crossing a line, but the truth is, I've been falling for you since the night we met in smoke and fire." The relief that crashed through me was overwhelming. Tears stung my eyes, and I laughed shakily, gripping his hand as if I'd never let go. I was so scared, I admitted, scared I was imagining everything. "You weren't imagining it," he said, squeezing my hand. "You were seeing what I was trying too hard to hide." In that moment, the fear dissolved. All that remained was the certainty that love, unexpected, fragile, yet undeniable, had been there all along, waiting for the courage to be spoken aloud. And now it was ours. After that night, something changed between us, not abruptly, not in a way that startled either of us, but gently, like dawn unfolding across the sky. The friendship that had been our anchor shifted into something deeper, a current of tenderness weaving through every shared moment. We no longer needed to pretend that our laughter was just laughter or that our silences were just silence. Beneath it all was love, steady, undeniable, and kind. We began to spend more time together, not out of habit, but with intention. When he finished his shifts at the station, I would wait with coffee, and he would smile as though the simple sight of me erased the day's exhaustion. Sometimes we walked through the city streets with no destination, simply enjoying the comfort of being side by side. Other times, we stayed in, cooking meals, sharing stories, or sitting in companionable quiet, the closeness between us enough to fill the room. And we talked about the future, not in hurried, desperate plans, but in quiet dreams we were beginning to stitch together. He confessed he had always wanted to see the mountains up north, to stand among the pines and breathe air that hadn't touched concrete. I told him about my wish to travel, to write about the people I met and the places I saw. We laughed at the thought of how little money either of us had, but we promised each other that someday we would make it happen. That promise felt more real than anything I had planned alone. He supported me in ways no one else had before. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of the strength he had seen in me, the same strength that had carried me through that night of fire. And I, in turn, reminded him that he was more than just his uniform, more than the rescues and the sacrifices. He was a man capable of love, joy, and dreams of his own, and I wanted to share all of them with him. Often, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had led me here. I thought back to that night in the hostel, to the chaos, the heat, the suffocating smoke that had left me helpless. At the time, it felt like the end, the darkest moment of my life. And yet, out of those flames came the man who would change everything. Sometimes, when his hand brushed mine, or when I caught him looking at me with that quiet, steady gaze, I would think, if not for that fire, I might never have found him. It was a terrifying night, yes, one I wouldn't wish to relive. But it was also the night that set my life on a different course, one that led me here, to warmth instead of fear, to love instead of loneliness. And so, when I look back now, I don't just remember the fire. I remember the arms that carried me out, the voice that promised safety, the man who showed me that love can rise out of the most unexpected places. He didn't just save my life. He gave me something even greater, a reason to live it fully. And that I will carry with me forever.